Formerly the Gold Coast, Ghana was the first black African colony to achieve independence in 1957.
Scattered along Ghana's Atlantic coast, there are over 20 stone-structured, some of them over 400 years old. Originally built by the Europeans as trading posts, they went on to become holding forts for millions of Africans forced into slavery. Today, some of these have been renovated as monuments to this human tragedy. But not only that, they have created a lot of interest and have helped the local tourism industry really boom in this area.
Ghana's 42 forts and castles are recognized by UNESCO as World Heritage Monuments.
Felix, for the visitor coming to Ghana, which are some of the forts and castles to see?
In Cape Coast area, you can see the Cape Coast Castle, then you can see the Elmina Castle, you can see Fort St. Jago, Fort Metal Cross in Dixcove, then Fort St. Sebastian.
So did any of the African slaves actually help physically build any of the castles and forts?
The African captives did help. The Elmina people, for example, themselves are stone cutters, and they had a skill of building with stones.
True testament to the expertise of the stone masons who were held captive here is the fact that many of the forts are remarkably well preserved. Although built in the 17th century, Fort Metal Cross, also known as Dixcove, has been restored to its original glory.
Wow, it's a lovely view up here, but I wonder, did any of the slaves actually get to enjoy this view? I doubt it.
But for today's visitor, the views across the Atlantic are breathtaking.
I guess this was the bell that was used to call my ancestors, the slaves, out to work. Then again, it could have been a warning that invaders were coming. Felix, what's the background to this fort we're sitting at?
This fort was initially built by the English in 1692, and they called it Dixcove Fort. Yeah, but the Dutch took it over, and the Dutch brought a ship here which they call Metallen Cruise, which is translated Metal Cross. This slave room is about 4 square meters, and this room could take 25 captives. The hole you are seeing up here was where food was thrown from for the captives. We have 3 of these rooms at the fort.
Further down the east coast is the only fort not tainted by the shackles of slavery.
Built in 1666, Fort St. Jago was the only fort that was not used for housing slaves. It was built for military purposes and for defending the castle.
The architecture of St. Jago is that of a working fort with high walls and a single front entrance.
Felix, tell us something interesting about Fort St. Jago.
Fort St. Jago was built by the Dutch. The fact is that this was the spot which the Dutch used to attack the Portuguese.
The battle for control over Ghana's precious Gold Coast raged on for centuries.
Felix, what was the function of this tower?
This tower was used for communication purposes. See, apart from this fort, there were other redoubts in the town. In the night, they used flashes of light, and in the afternoon, they used mirror to signal them so that they will get ready for the attacks.
One of the most memorable forts is that of St. Sebastian, with unique half-moon stairs leading up to the front doorway.
Fort St. Sebastian was built by the Portuguese in 1640. In fact, this was the very first place they landed before spreading out all over Cape Coast. Now, originally, these forts were built as a trading post and also as a way to spread Christianity. This place was originally a point of departure for humans. Today, it's a point of departure for letters and packages.
Even on a grey day, the views are spectacular. One of Ghana's most visited historical sites is the castle in the colourful town of Cape Coast.
Mr. Blankson, what's the history of Cape Coast Castle?
Cape Coast Castle was built by the Swedes in around 1653, so they could participate in the transatlantic slave trade.
So what part did it play in the slave trade?
This castle served as a transit point where the captives were brought in, were auctioned, and then sold to the European merchants. They were kept here in the dungeons until their ships arrived, and they were loaded on board the ships to begin their journey across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, the West Indies, and Americas.
The tragic history of the slave trade is very present here. The vast dungeons still whisper of the people they held captive.
This used to be known as a door of no return. But in 1998, this was renamed the Door of Return when the remains of 2 former slaves was returned home to the motherland. Since then, Ghana has been symbolically known as the gateway to West Africa.
One cannot escape the Cape Coast's powerful sense of history. The museum at Cape Coast Castle tells the story of the sins and suffering of the past.
The castles and forts along Ghana's coastlines form a sad yet important part of my people's history, a fact that many Ghanaians are now beginning to recognize and to use positively.